Third night on our stained glass windows. Tonight we have Anthony Visco, a local artist, presenting on our stained glass windows from an artistic perspective. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you again, Father. Um, anyway, as we know, the Gospel of John is all about the light and how important it is to us on many different levels. And again, as I was saying earlier, in the Trinitarian sense that I always consider when I'm teaching these things that um, I God the Father is the source. Light on is God the Son because of the incarnation, and God through is the Holy Spirit. This is an illustration, two illustrations. One is the first page of the Saragoga Haggadah, and another was simply an abstract one. And what's so important to understand in our theology is that it's not light and dark necessarily, but order from chaos. And that's why in the Haggadah illustration, you'll see the sun and the moon there, that God separates lux et tenebrum. And it's very different than what we consider some of the illustrations and frescoes and things like that is making night and day. That really doesn't happen until the fourth day of creation. So I like these simple illustrations so much. And this is a very good sort of illustration of it for me. These two half discs separating clarity and obscurity, or known and unknown. Light was important throughout all cultures, and in this case, here we have the oculus from the Pantheon, which is now, of course, Catholic Church. And the coffers will tell time where the sun was. It's actually a calendar. Here it is today as a church. And of course, following the sunlight, this is a big feast in Florence where they celebrate the summer equinox, and of course, leading up to the feast of their patron saint, Saint John the Baptist. So I'm going to go through these three types before we get to St. Patrick's. So light from is represented in so many different ways, usually through some brilliant color or gold itself. And that seems to be the most dominant. Of course, it's still reflecting back. It's not the source, but it gives us a sense of the source because gold actually works in this on many different levels. Sometimes we can't really find the source from it because it's so highly reflected and still an object. There also is another symbolism is it lasts forever. So it doesn't oxidize. Some of the facades of our churches are done in such a way that at certain times of day, it just reflects back completely. Here's St. Paul outside the walls on an afternoon. And the Cathedral of Orvieto, which we'll talk about again in terms of light and the interior. And mosaic is also another form of light giving back. And if you look at these, they were intentionally, the mosaics in Ravenna are intentionally set off, and they're not flat. And that's because now they're all illuminated with LED and everything, so you don't get that sensation. But when you would walk by, and of course it's candlelit or daylit, they'd flicker. So these figures of the saints looked alive. And of course, in Orthodoxy, they do a reversal, which is so interesting how the physical or the bodies are flat, but the holy is raised. And of course, we use gold for the instruments in the Eucharist and for reliquaries. This is the crown of thorns that St. Louis brought back from the Crusades. And of course, the monstrance. So in this interpretation, we have Christ painted two-dimensionally, the glory, as they would call it in oklad in Russian, which means the benefits, the payoff, and holding this transparent sphere. But visible light is something that we rely on, and we don't know how not to use it in a sense, but we do know how to translate it in different ways. So I'll go first with light on and the phenomena of it and how long it took to kind of understand it and use it. And I really do believe that this all came about through first St. Francis of Assisi and continuing on to, of course, Beato Angelico, the great Dominican artist who understood how light works on volume. And between light and shade, perspective, and anatomy, all three were discovered, and we've never come across it again where so well it described the incarnation. This is the Cappella Brancacci in Florence, painted by Masaccio. It's one of the early frescoes. And even though you can't really see it here, the window actually lights not the frescoes so you can see them, but it lights them in the direction of the art itself. So what happens is people in the room are lit the same way as the fresco. So this idea of experiencing it and being part of it, that was really quite essential. So if you were in that space and looking at the people, you'd see the light fall on them the same way it's falling on the figures in the paintings. And it was all to give a sense of witness. This is an old photograph, of course, of Da Vinci's Last Supper before the war. But you can see what's important about this is in natural light. Unfortunately, we can never see it like this again. But I looked at this photograph and I realized that the cast shadows on the chairs going in the same direction as the figures in the painting. So that means when the friars were at the refectory having their meals, they were all lit the same way the apostles were lit. Now, of course, that's impossible to have. But, just to give you an idea how important and significant light on the opaque object was. And of course, for sculpture as well. Bernini would insist, you can see it a little bit up here. It's not, when we see the St. Teresa in Ecstasy of Bernini, that's natural light pouring on it. He devised a window that would come down and illuminate it. Light through is probably the one that gives us the mystery. And it changes constantly because it's natural light through different times of day. We can't really illuminate stained glass too well from the back. It doesn't quite work. We really need natural light. And again, this idea of Christ holding this absolute transparent sphere. This illustration of the source and where it comes from and goes to and reflects back gets repeated with Our Lady because she really is the light of God the Father through the Holy Spirit and illuminating our world as well. And these earlier illustrations is something I would love to see revised in today's art somehow. But the idea of having these clear stories, there's some churches that don't have stained glass, mainly because they wanted to let the clear light in. That's why we call it the clear story. That took a while. And some without stained glass, would use alabaster. It's a wonderful material for letting light through. These are the windows in the Cathedral of Orvieto. As you can see, it's almost, when you look at some of these different patterns, they become very beautiful, quite dramatic, and give a golden light. But the pictorial thing took a while. And here, of course, is the Chair St. Peter, also in alabaster. But the other strange thing about stained glass windows and light is it seems that the more chromatic the interior of the church is, the more polychrome it is, there's no stained glass. They would sort of interfere with each other. I've never seen one that has a combination of both, but I'm sure some of you were here last week. Remember that with Joe Byers talked about how we make these cartoons first, and the reason why we call it cartoon, it really comes from the word cartone, which means big paper. Okay, so we make these large drawings, actual size of the window, and it varies in terms of, number one, is the fenestration already there? Do we have to fit it into something that pre-exists, which is the case for St. Patrick's? Those window frames were there. And that's a challenge for any artist to do anything in a pre-described space. This I thought was an incredible invention of the Feast of the Lamb and how it had to be divided up into these three Gothic windows. So we can tell from things like this is a more contemporary one because the figures are almost silhouetted. They've got the glass to do it. And as we were talking last week, from behind, it has to be leaded, sometimes even with, we see these darker steel bars here to hold it up more. But from the other side and without light coming through it, we really don't see it. So it's actually a challenge for an artist who's making the stained glass to lay it down flat on the table and not be able to see what they're doing until it gets erected and erected in the site. So here we have some fragments of early stained glass, not much color. The first colors were really just the silver, black line, and yellow. Blue took a while to incorporate. Okay, so here we just have essentially monochromatic with some yellow and blue. Blue becoming a very dominant color and force in stained glass. But once red was introduced, it almost seemed like the artists that were doing stained glass wanted sort of a gem, what we call gem tones, emerald, ruby, sapphire, diamond, topaz, and were imitating some of the colors that were achievable in manuscript painting. Which is when we see this windows at St. Patrick's, this is a Pollaiuolo window from Florence. Artists, no matter what they did, he was predominantly a fresco painter sculptor, were asked to do windows. And you can start to see here how many small pieces of glass it took. They just didn't have big sheets the way we would have later. This is a Ghiberti. The colors are brilliant now. Here's another Ghiberti of the Agni in the Garden. Again, just hundreds and hundreds of pieces of glass. Trying to save the larger ones. If we notice, the artist has to try to save the large ones for things like faces and hands. You don't want those things too broken up. But vegetation, rocks, whatever, make up the rest that way. And then we have the great rose window of Saint-Chapelle. And excuse me, Notre Dame. Saint-Chapelle, where the holy relics were kept. To go inside there it's almost, you feel like you're inside of a gem. And it's if you get the experience, the opportunity to go to Saint-Chapelle in Paris, I would definitely advise it. It is just breathtaking. But now we cross the Atlantic, and the craftsmen, the artisans that did all those wonderful things in Europe are not here. However, George Washington loved the idea of religious freedom so much that he actually donated. Now, Old St. Joseph's already existed. He knew that. That was built. But he donated $50 of his own money for the construction of St. Augustine's, the first St. Augustine's. Commodore Barry gave 100. So here we have Old St. Joseph. We don't have, this is the renovated one. We don't have any examples of the stained glass that was there. So we don't really know what, if they had it in what it looked like. That's a nice, it's a beautiful window of God the Father there. And then, of course, the know-nothings changed the idea of stained glass in Philadelphia. So that's another reason why we don't have some of the earliest examples, burning down St. Michael's and burning down St. Augustine's at Fourth and Vine, which is how the Augustinians wound up in Villanova. And how did it affect stained glass in Philadelphia? Well, there was the how high can you throw a brick theory or philosophy, which was in building our cathedral here. The builders would throw a brick as high as they could because we don't have stained glass windows in the cathedral that are low enough to strike. So this gives you an idea of the windows in our cathedral here. They're high, especially this photo with the lights out. You can see where the piercings are. And here we are at St. Patrick's, which has, if for those who have never been, the opportunity to go there and not just see the stained glass, but it's just a wonderful parish. Oh, sorry, that's the cathedral again. Now, you could say that this is an example of light from the way the gold leaf is on the semi-dome there. And what I always found fascinating is that this zigzag period pattern rather is reminiscent of how we get the cupola out of flat brick in St. Patrick's. This is more the building, but it's based on a herringbone pattern that was the same as Brunelleschi used in creating the Duomo of Florence, the cupola. And the windows are pretty high. I don't think it was because of the same reasons, but there were very constricted spaces. Here's kind of what they look like from the inside, illuminated from the out. But the iconography is just incredible. And you could, as Father was saying, you can get binoculars and just go through the whole thing. And it's salvation history, essentially, from the creation all the way to the Bishop Newman, one of our patron saints here. So I want you to notice something here because I'm going to talk about it later as well. The use of halos in the windows. The artists decided that no figures before Christ will receive a halo. So we have God the Father with the Trinitarian halo and Archangel Gabriel with the sword, and Noah doesn't get one. This idea of the hand coming out during the creation of water is something that I think it's in the upper corner of that. But again, we're seeing what's happening. The draftsmanship of one period changes to the other, and unfortunately, um, this one of the hand, the more modernist version, I can't even count the fingers because of the bad divisions. And it's something we really have to retrain artists. You can't be confusing with these things. There's no need to be. So again, here's Sacrifice of Isaac, and none of the Old Testament figures are to receive halos. I'm not sure what the reason was there, but the color is magnificent. And again, the role of light. Here's and sun. Here's Noah being coughed up by the whale. This is a beauty. Now, what happens sometimes in these, I'm not sure why, the color of the faces, sometimes flesh tones aren't easy to get, and we usually don't do it in this type. They just do light and shade. But if we notice, they're almost like some of those earlier ones that we have in the early medieval period, where it's just a line drawing. And the color is reserved for vestments and garments. Passover. It's one of David's very, very handsome. Solomon. These are not easy to do when you're limited in space and you've got this many figures to do. What we have to resort to is just very, very clear overlapping, not much cropping, because you can't have them go sort of off the screen or off stage. So maybe a portion of the back will be, but the gestures have to be clear. So we can see in this woman where we see her other hand. It's got to be there. That's sort of a tacit rule in this kind of iconography, presentation of Samuel. Every hand. Queen Esther. Presentation of the Virgin. Again, the entire Holy Family receives the halos. Now, halo world. This is very interesting because this goes back to our relationship with the Byzantine, where the halo must be absolutely frontal. It cannot be askew, it can't be turned, it can't be tilted, but absolutely frontal and just a pure circle, essentially. And dimensionals. Here's where Giotto continued the tradition of the Orthodox, or what we call Italo-Byzantine. So the flesh is flat, the holiness is what's dimensional. And here you could really see the cast shadows of those halos in this Giotto fresco of the Final Judgment. They're quite big, made out of plaster. The idea of the tilted one was always considered, oh, that's they shouldn't be in perspective because that means it's our space and our time. But that was the big switch in the Renaissance artists, because it was, how do we represent the sacred in our space and our time by using natural light and perspective and anatomy. So here's the one on the right is the Da Vinci that he did for when he was working for Verrocchio. And here we've got, the Annunciation to Saint Zachariah here. Not sure why he didn't get a halo, but that's, you don't have anybody to ask. And here's the two versions. One is the one at St. Patrick's, and the other is, again, the very simple white, yellow version. So the color of St. Patrick's is just amazing. It's very rich, and it carries all those things I was talking about in terms of gem tones, ruby, emerald, sapphire, diamond, topaz. Now, what's interesting is I find in a couple cases here that these are the artists borrowed from other artworks. So when I saw this, it brought to mind immediately the Annunciation, excuse me, the Visitation of Luca della Robbia, the terracotta. And again, what we can't see in the della Robbia, where there's all the arms, all the hands, everything gets exposed, we do in the window. It's the marriage of the Virgin. And this is something that we don't ever really represent in any other way than a strict bilateral composition, whether it's sculpted or in relief or in painting. And it really shows that they're on the same plane. It's absolutely equality of subject is how we refer to it. So here we have the Nativity, the adoration of the shepherds on one side and the adoration of the Magi on the other. I got interested in how the same figures would just have, I would call it costume changes, where Our Lady's not necessarily dressed the same way, mainly because we need different lighting, things like that. So, and here we have the presentation. I have a feeling that whoever put these together must have read books on what's the name, from Foligno. He gives a prescription on what is supposed to be in this story. For example, if this is the presentation, it has to have Our Lady, Saint Joseph, Simeon. It could have Anna. It doesn't have to. It has to have the turtle dove sacrifice, or offering rather. And it sort of gives you the minimum. You can't have less than this. But if you wanted to make it as Baroque or whatever and have a cast of thousands, that's possible. But at least those figures must be there. So here we have the dream for the flight into Egypt and the flight into Egypt. Now, Ghiberti was someone who had to work with a confined space as well. So that's why I'm trying to sort of giving you a parallel. When something is prescribed like this, how do you get all these figures in there, or can you? So there's nothing that says you have to have this many doctors when you're doing Christ among the doctors of the church. And here we have two versions of the Holy Family. Usually there's none other than Saint Joseph, Our Lady, and the Christ Child. And here we have the baptism of Christ. And again, here, the angel with the robe, Saint John, Christ with the cruciform nimbus, and the Holy Spirit, all with halos. I got a little sidetracked here because I discovered that there were panels here just dedicated to the Baptists, and then Father told me today it's in another room. It's not up there. It's not that I missed them. It's in a room that was considered as, it could have been a baptistry, but never was used as our baptistry and baptismal font is in the lower church with beautiful mosaics. But it goes through John in the wilderness, and then John preaching. One thing that's not in here is usually when John is preaching, there's a figure of Christ behind him, because they're asking him, "Are you him?" And he says, "No, he's I'm not him. And that because he'll talk about how I'm not worthy." But most depictions throughout history have Christ somewhere else in the background. John doesn't see him. Here's an example of it. And of course, this is the baptism I was talking about earlier with the halos in perspective by Da Vinci and Verrocchio. Beheading of the Baptist. again, these quatrefoils that are on these door panels are just like the windows in the sense that you have to fit all these figures in that space. You've got no more than that. Um, Here we have an icon, Byzantine icon representation of the marriage feast of Cana. And again, it's the minimum maximum of you need Our Lady, you need Christ, you need servers with urns or jugs, and the wedding couple. Now, if you notice something, the servers on the bottom, this happened a lot in stained glass industry where they just borrow the same drawings. So that one figure is the same. The raising of Lazarus. Again, Ghiberti can fit so many because it's all overlap. Same idea, whether it's sculpture or stained glass. Procession to the uh, Christ's entry into Jerusalem. The Last Supper is tough, no matter what you do. If you've got a more vertical space than a horizontal space, very difficult. And this artist not only put all the disciples in, but also snuck Judas in the back, leaving. Pentecost is another difficult one. And you can see how in this other one, the artist had no choice rather than to put it in two windows. But it works. Now, this is the only one that I found through the whole series that, other than the one I thought looked like the Della Robbia Visitation. This is such a direct drawing of the Pharisee and the publican. And this is from an illustration by Julia Bonsour, who was an incredible engraver and probably on a certain level I find more interesting than Doré, who did beautiful, beautiful work. But there's a certain dynamism or dynamic drama, I should say, in his work that I don't find sometimes in Doré, although I admire him greatly. And plus the light and shade variations in Schnorr is much greater. I like his use of light. But whoever did this said, "Oh, I got just the figure for that," and no one went crazy with copyrights and things like that. And it was used by other people. Here's a chromatic version of it, same figures. The idea of copying a painting was very prevalent, and here we've got direct copy from the painting. It became pretty frequent especially in 19th century. Here we have Raphael's Sistine Madonna. They took the Madonna out and left everything else. Again, probably because of no space. But the good thing and the bad thing about this is it might have introduced people to some great art if they knew it was coming from there. And this is a stained glass window from the Hunt Christ Among the Doctors. But I feel as if this was where Catholic convention was starting to fade. St. Augustine, St. Monica at Ostia. And sometimes sculpture would get copied. And you can see here how the artist couldn't copy the hands of the Christ child in the sculpture. So he had to change them because that kind of foreshortening would not be readable in stained glass. Now, back to St. Patrick's, certain themes I found amazing, like the flogging of St. Paul. That doesn't get done too often at all. And it's hard to find another image of it. But yet, I just wish there was some record of how these themes were chosen. in the windows. Another one is Saint Kateri. She wasn't even beatified then. She wasn't beatified till what, 1970, I think, and canonized um, later. But whoever had a foresight of these North American and South American saints to be, they weren't even that well known. And here we have Philip of Jesus, who usually gets depicted in his Franciscan robes. He was from Mexico. He was martyred in Nagasaki. But this is the only image of him I've ever seen where he's stripped down as Christ. Um, Usually he's in his Franciscan habit, as I said. And then Saint Rose of Lima. And the artist chose to use what we call the Vesica piscis, the fish bladder, which we see in a lot of both Eastern and Western art. It is essentially the overlapping of two circles on the point of their center. And what it's symbolic of is these two worlds coming together into one. This is a fragment from a stained glass of stigmata of St. Francis. And it's used in sculpture as well. But it was the only instance I found in St. Patrick movies. And this is, of course, our St. John Newman, who also was not blessed or canonized when these windows went up. He was simply the bishop. And you can see that this is where the use of the photograph may start to influence the likeness that the stained glass artists were using. And also Pius X is here. I'm not sure which photograph, but there was obviously use of a photograph there because we know he didn't sit for it. In terms of Philadelphia stained glass, this woman was considered the first lady of stained glass in Philadelphia, Paula Bolano. She did phenomenal work. She actually went to the Academy of Fine Arts here, but she didn't learn this there, I can tell you that. But her windows are still at St. Agnes in Westchester. They were at the Ascension Parish in Kensington, but they've been taken out. The church is no longer. But she also had that rich sense of color that we see in the St. Patrick windows. Schools of. Now this is where at the end of, say, someone like Apollo Bolano and the onslaught of modernism, things really changed dramatically. And I'm not sure where all this is going to go. I'm hoping for the better. I am seeing some promise. But it gets to a point where we don't even know quite who it is or what it is. And again, here we have an example on the right there there's no reason for the glass to be that broken up. One taboo is to don't put glass behind. And you see that in some modern church designs where behind the altar, the light just is distracting. The priest is in silhouette. You can't compete with that. St. Charles Borromeo in his writings on designs of churches clearly says don't put windows behind the altar. Now, another thing not to do is don't do the Stations of the Cross in the windows because they're usually said in the evening and it's March, February, even March. It's dark. You won't see them. I saw these in a church in West Virginia and I just couldn't believe it because I couldn't tell one from the other. They're just heads. And again, here's an example of Karl Richter, who was a very famous artist in Germany, modernist artist, and he got to replace this incredible window that was blown out in the Second World War, but it's just he decided to just pixelate it. And he said, well, that's all you see anyway. So he did the same colors, but no configuration whatsoever. Then we passed this period, thank God. This is chunk glass or facet glass, big pieces of um, glass, not painted at all, and put together with a lot of heavy concrete. And what happened over the years is the concrete started to give way, so they replaced it with this new stuff called resin. That didn't work either. So thank God a lot of them are gone. And here we have Saint Therese interpreted in chunk glass. We have a problem here because if you wanted to do abstractions, this is not what we should do with saints who we now have photographs of, nor do you have to copy the photograph exactly, which is what's happening in our two newly canonized saints, Saint Carlo Acutis and Saint Pier Giorgio Frassati. They're actually just kind of, I mean, this one advertises itself as, it's the first saint in jeans and Adidas sneakers. It's not necessarily attributes of the saints. Poor Pier Giorgio gets always the same picture. And it's time for Catholic invention to come along. Now here's another back to the color school. I'm sorry. I don't know what that one was. Am I back? I know I read it and it just doesn't make sense. I don't know if it's the resurrection of the widow's son or something. It's just it doesn't configurate. It's just color. Now here was a local artist, Father Richard Cannuli, who is no longer with us, but Richard was an Augustinian artist who just had a great color sense. And this is his version of Saint Monica and Saint Augustine. And I'm not sure what church it's in, but there are windows of his out at Villanova and all over the place. Richard did a lot of work and designed vestments as well. And then I've only had the opportunity once. This is my cartoon for a stained glass window I did for Our Lady of Guadalupe in Buckingham, PA. And that's the top version of it. It's Our Lady's mantle. It's to go at the behind the Tilma shrine that we have there. And unfortunately I don't have a great picture of it because this is the morning light. It comes in very strong, and the Tilma shrine below sort of blocks some of it out. But and this isn't stained glass. I think that was part of the issue for me anyway. It wasn't painted, it was colored. And that's a big difference. You can't get some of those rich forms. But I think that the iridescence is coming back. This is an artist friend of mine in Poland who's doing these kinds of paintings, and very much like stained glass. We've talked about it. And the other thing is the light of stained glass on the architecture when it's allowed to be, as we can see here, that the building itself gets bathed in color. And here we come to the Cathedral of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And nothing's pictorial here. There's lots and lots of sculptures on the outside, as we know, Gaudí designed, others made, but he designed it to be that way. And if you look at it, all those spaces are for colored glass. And I've never been, but I've heard from others that at different times of day, the amount of light coming through these colors is just mesmerizing, which it should be. It should be. It's something that we got away from, which is nothing should be considered excessive when you're trying to describe or have the feeling of the glory of God. It took me a while to understand that because I was not big on Rococo art and I didn't understand why anybody would just go so much. But that school of thought is there's nothing's too much. So, and you can see the one on the left, how the columns are just, they look like they're painted those colors. Now, I'm going to end here because Gaudí, and for those who don't know, is he's already he was servant of God and is now um up to be beatified, which puts him there with our Dominican Fra Angelico. Um we need more artists, sacred artists to be elevated in the church. It's you wonder how many people stand in line all day to see the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Pietà. And I know of conversion experiences that have happened there, but I think art history would not really appreciate our artists becoming beatified or sanctified or canonized. So anyway, I appreciate you all participating, being here. We've got, I think, got time for some questions and answers, Father. It's up to you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was incredible.
Thank you.
So let's see. All right, so any questions from anyone?
I think I have a short one.
Mhm.
If Anthony, what cathedral was, I'm sorry, Carl Richter in
Oh,
with the
that's in
cardboard
Cologne. It's in Cologne.
Cologne? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
See, it's an idea, and I don't quite know where it come from. It wasn't just that he's a modernist, but this idea that, oh, let's get a famous artist to do this. See, there's a perception out there that, as if Lorenzo uh um the Medici walked down some street in Florence and saw this whatever in a gallery and said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna get that guy. Who is that? Oh, it's Michelangelo." There's no galleries to get these people from. Carl Richter is a gallery artist. He's a gallerist. So the idea that we get famous people to do this work the way they did in the Renaissance is just a big fallacy. It didn't happen that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. But it's a missed opportunity, Susan. We don't know what we're not getting. There probably could have been an artist that waited his or her entire life to do that window. So,
I was in a cathedral in Rouen, France, that also had a lot of window damage. I thought maybe that was the cathedral.
no,
That's why I asked you.
it's Germany. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thanks for the question. It's a good question.
Anthony, do you have any thoughts about the different colored halos in our windows?
I think that was just to it wasn't they don't repeat. I know, but I think it was just if these garments or robes or this, or I've got that in the background, I'm making the halo this. It's very interesting because in those scenes where there are two or three or four halos, none of them match. They're all four different, if it's four people, it's four different colors.
Hmm.
So I think it's just kind of artistic play to get more palette in there. There's nothing essentially iconographic about it in terms of meaning, just that they're the frontal halo. They kept with that tradition, which I also think is because to put halos in perspective in those tight spaces would have been confusing to the viewer. So just keep it a frontal circle, full circle.
And then here's another question for you. So we have so many scenes from salvation history in one place.
Yeah.
And how many other churches can you think of that have so many that have that kind of order to the whole story and so many images.
I don't know. I've never seen anything quite like it, you know?
Mm.
It's amazing. I mean, you wonder if there were empty spaces at St. Patrick's, how you would continue that, you know? Especially now with someone like, who's trying to come? Someone like, Pier Giorgio, who was, a lay Franciscan, excuse me, Dominican. So why isn't he sometimes in, his Dominican habit there? That would be an opportunity for a window in a Dominican church, I would say.
Do you have any thoughts about the stained glass windows in the lower church, which were apparently done in the 50s?
I think that I particularly like them, I guess, because they deal with all the apparitions of Our Lady. And it's again between the combination of essentially the rosary upstairs and uh, uh, the apparitions of Our Lady downstairs and the little grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes down there. It's a wonderful prayer space. And it's just and of course as I told you, I love the baptismal font there.
Tony,
Beautiful
I have
little
a question.
Okay.
Paula Bolano, was she from Philadelphia?
Tina, I'm not sure where she was from, but she went to different schools. Supposedly, and that photograph shows that she was a big time smoker and rode a motorcycle.
Oh my God.
So she's quite a dynamic woman, they say.
Do you know where she studied stained glass?
I don't, probably in a stained glass studio. I would say because the two schools that she went to, neither one dealt with stained glass. How she picked it up and how she mastered it in a way is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
That's why they call her the first lady of stained glass.
I'll have to look her up.
Okay. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you have anything fine, Tina, let me know.
Okay.
I was trying to get more on the windows from the Ascension. And there was a couple articles, especially when this church was closed and people were writing in saying they're being stoned to death. Get them out now. But the church wasn't officially closed at that time. And I know, the guy said, like, I can't close it. Well, then board them up. At least board them up so they don't get damaged. That now I think they're in either North Carolina or they've been saved and they've been replaced. They found a new home in either North Carolina or South Carolina, I forget. But they're all there, and the new architect said, I will design the fenestration to accept the Polo Bolano stained glass, which happened at St. Joseph's in Downingtown as well. They got all the stained glass from Most Precious Blood. So the demand was ever the architect, you must do fenestration that accommodates those windows. They bought the windows first before they even broke ground
Wow.
because they knew they wanted them. Yeah, that's a beauty. That's another beauty. And they're mostly Bavarian glass. So,
Anthony, when was the transition from clear to clear and yellow to colors?
that's all 11th and 12th century stuff. It takes a while. And like I said, you can see all the breaks in them. It's a toss up between, I don't have big sheets of glass, so I have to break it up small, but that's going to add more lead, which is going to make it heavier. So it took a while to balance that out between the two. But yeah, it took a while for those colors to be developed.
Here's another maybe loaded question, but so you see this development. I'm learning all of this anew, but this development of stained glass. Do you think that with all that development and new creativity, even though the stained glass was made in Europe, that in some instances you have some of the best stained glass windows in the United States?
Here, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I'm not sure they continued it there. That's the thing. Everything I'm showing from Europe is, centuries old already. And I mean, I'm sure there's some beautiful examples, but I don't know what they're doing. I really don't hear of anything of that quality being continued in Europe.
Well, Joseph Byers said last week that you had all the artisans in Europe, but all
Yes,
the churches already had windows or their own art, other
yes,
sacred forms of sacred art. And so the market for new churches was really in the New World.
yes, it was,
And
absolutely.
so then you had continued developments and creativity from those artists in Europe, but the art was coming to the New World. So I've seen some very, I mean, again, from an outsider's perspective, who's traveled to Europe, I've seen some beautiful things there, but I've seen some beautiful things here
Oh, yeah,
that seem to be quality wise some of the best.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So, and we were growing where European churches were already there, and the newer ones that they were building, they just, I mean, I've seen it in Italy. They just didn't want anything traditional looking any longer. So, and some don't even have windows. It's as simple as that. They just don't have, well, I mean, especially in places like Florence, you have frescoes, you don't have stained glass windows. So,
What are some of your favorite stained glass windows or churches with stained glass windows?
well, I didn't show them because I didn't want to overload, but I really do love the Tiffany windows, and we have them here in Philadelphia. Not in any Catholic churches that I can find, but St. Stephen's on South 9th Street. It's a little Episcopal church. It has St. Gaudens sculpture and Tiffany windows. And what Tiffany did was he layered colored glass. It's not painted. It's just the glass was rolled in these beautiful tones and colors, and he'd overlapped them in such a way that they gave another color, these different color mixes. And the luminosity was amazing. There's another one at the Catherine Pure Memorial in Bryn Mawr. But Tiffany did amazing religious, stained glass windows. So if you get the opportunity, if it's opened, I don't know what happened. I haven't been to St. Stephen's on South 9th Street to see the inside for quite a while, but they're here. And
Maybe we should have a field trip.
that would be fun. Yeah,
Hmm.
we'll do that. And there's more. I think I was talking to Joe. Joe knows where there's even more of the Tiffany windows around here.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, well, I hope you enjoyed the series, Father. You're the one that had the idea to put it together.
Yes, very much. And I'm so glad we captured this, and yours and Joseph Byers, especially your lectures, and so that people can always visit our website and for posterity's sake, and because a lot of really insightful and inspiring thoughts and to help us
Somebody
appreciate.
already wrote to me and said, I can't, I'll be in bed by then, but will it be recorded? I said, Father records everything. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow. Don't worry about it. Good night,
All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much, Maestro.
Oh, thank you, Father. Again,
Very, very grateful. Thanks for
stay
all
in touch.
everyone for attending, and may Almighty God bless and guide us always, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. All right, have a good night. Thanks
Be
again.
well. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
very much, Anthony. Thanks, Father.